before people arrive, I'm going to try to quickly get through the rest of what we were working on yesterday. Shout out to Luminance Bloom for the follow. And yeah, we hit the 110. Not too shabby. All right, so the idea was to add in this paper from the Google research team about AI and consciousness, and to say something like, okay, let's jump back to the discussion about AI and consciousness. My thoughts during our conversation were stemming from a mix of this paper and my understanding of Damasio's work and the free energy principle or regulation in general. So my thought was that this type of system would require the fidelity of the analog signals involved in this type of system, and if you were to reduce that down into digital, then you might see similar behavior, but there's so much underlying stuff that's being missed that perhaps you'd be losing that aspect of consciousness that we'd be looking for. Now, I understand that that's not exactly the paper's argument, but it is somewhat similar. And yeah, so what are your thoughts on that one? Okay, let's actually just get rid of that. Let's see if it gives us anything good here. Okay, one thing I want to do today is look over this roadmap. Set the stream schedule here. See the stream. Okay, right. Oh my gosh, we have nothing in this stream schedule. We need to fill this back up. This was QA. When were the QA days? QA day 1, day 2. QA day 2 is this day. This was QA day 1. This was day 3. Awesome. Then we came back. We did something yesterday. This was just chilling. Just chilling. That's kind of what we're doing today. And I expect to be just chilling tomorrow. Though tomorrow, actually, it could be something like, I don't know, going over... Actually, tomorrow is going to be kind of the victory lap. Victory lap. Stream released. Video essay released, I'm sorry. I think video essay is going to be released 9:30 tomorrow morning. Hopefully, we can get some views on that thing. Now, I don't know what the best way of doing that is, because there's actually not many subreddits actually make it easy for you to just self post. So I don't know. I'm not sure what to do about that. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. We'll see. We'll figure it out. I gotta then start reaching out to some people, such as Ivan. See what they're doing. See if they're interested in reading that or watching it. And go from there. Okay, yes, that is a much stronger version of the thought than digital equals impossible, because binary. What you're describing is not merely brains are analog, computers are digital, therefore computers cannot be conscious. That version is very easy to attack. The stronger version is consciousness may depend on the intrinsic high-dimensional, metabolically embodied dynamics of a living regulatory system. A digital model may preserve some functional behavioral relationships while discarding the constitutive physical dynamics that matter for experience. That was what I was hoping to say, and that is what I did not say well. That is much closer to Damasio Seth's style biological naturalism and activism and the paper's simulation versus instantiation distinction. Okay. The paper argues that computation is a map-maker dependent abstraction. Physical states only count as symbols or computation. Okay. So you're not saying that digital systems cannot imitate the behavior. You're saying the worry is that the features relevant to consciousness that we don't see, that are internal, like internal actions, may not be captured at the level of the digital abstraction. The digital model may reproduce a coarse-grained functional pattern while failing to instantiate the continuous biological regulation, metabolic vulnerability, affective valuation, interoceptive coupling, and the organism level self-maintenance then that consciousness may depend on. And this is plausible if we have these background assumptions that are Damasio-like consciousness is not just cognition, it is rooted in life regulation, homeostasis, felt body state, affect, and the organism's need to preserve itself. Under that view, a brain is not merely a signal processing device. It is part of a living body regulating itself under thermodynamic pressure. Oh, you know what I wanted to do today? I wanted to show off some shorts. Video essays. Nope, that was the wrong one. I said the wrong one. Boom. Let's download these bad boys. I realized that I didn't mix the audio yet, so I actually need to remake these, which is such a pain. I need to keep this up, don't I? Where I would still be careful, the word fidelity is doing a lot of work. A critic could say, fine, but if we simulate the relevant dynamics with enough fidelity, why wouldn't that be enough? And that would be enough. So I would avoid making the argument depend on resolution or detail. I think I would actually agree with the critic that if you were able to simulate with enough fidelity, you would be able to get that level of consciousness. The problem is you aren't able to simulate the relevant dynamics with enough fidelity without involving continuous signals. So you would be able to clone a brain or make a brain that's an analog system itself, but you wouldn't be able to simulate it on a machine. It would have to deal with the similar type of substrate. Now, that's also not to say that, I don't think it's the case that it needs to be that substrate, but I don't think it can be the computer substrate. So, your analog point is useful, but it should not be the center of the argument. The best version is analog biological dynamics may matter because they are part of the actual regulatory, metabolic, embodied causal system. I would summarize the relationship like this. The paper's argument is more ontological. Computation is a map, not the territory. Algorithmic symbol manipulation cannot instantiate experience because it depends on externally imposed abstraction. Right, so it requires that you learn the abstraction, but I feel like you could get around with that, perhaps. What does it say to this? And then we could just go on. It's closer to consciousness and maybe substrate sensitive because the relevant dynamics are not merely abstract input-output relations. If a system reproduced the relevant brain-body dynamics with sufficient physical fidelity, it might instantiate consciousness, but that would require an analog, continuous, materially brain-like or lifelike system, not a discrete symbolic simulation running on ordinary digital hardware. Right, and the type of by viewing consciousness through regulation, it shows that if you wanted to recreate consciousness, you would have to recreate regulation. Even though we feel like consciousness is this special other thing, and that it's a point of view from above, you'd actually be in some sense burdening something by giving it consciousness because you're putting it into a system that is now constrained by regulation. Okay. Energy Doctor, welcome. Would you be willing to watch a relatively long video or ask for a summary of it? I would prefer to ask the summary, which discusses language and cognition. Yes, but it's gotta be on topic. Just because it discusses language and cognition doesn't mean that it's necessarily on topic. Okay, let's call it quits for this one. I'm not going to delete this because an OK Life might still be working on it. Is this on topic?
I'm gonna get attacked.
I'm going to get attacked by physicists. Language without meaning. How LLMs exposed our biggest illusion. Ooh. Let's see. Let's see what the hook is actually.
This thing is just ridiculously good, and so that just blows my mind.
That gives us nothing. We have no idea what he was talking about. Discusses the provocative thesis that human language is an autonomous, self-contained, autoregressive system that operates independently of any inherent connection to the external world. Okay. Let's see what that means here. Let's try to intuit what that might mean. Not connected to the external world, so it might be self-contained within, you know, human brains and human regulatory systems, human social systems, etc. That's good stuff. Autoregressive, so I'm guessing this is like how it develops. It's a constantly developing system. Now, I don't know what autonomous means, because that makes it seem like the language is autonomous itself as opposed to being an expression of the biological systems. Our language is an autonomous system, argues that LLMs have exposed a fundamental illusion about language. Instead of words inherently pointing to meanings or physical objects in the world, language functions as a statistical self-generating structure based on next token prediction. So this is not necessarily the case. I don't know if he uses as strong language, but it wouldn't be the case that language functions as a statistical self-generating structure based on next token prediction. It doesn't have to be based on next token prediction. It's just that's one way you can get this type of thing. You could, you know, more easily ground it in statistical self-generation, which is certainly, that coincides with the idea of predictive processing, which would encapsulate the manifestation of language in our own conscious experience and our behavior. So we can imagine that being some sort of statistical self-generating structure. It doesn't have to be based on next token prediction. Actually, in the brain, it wouldn't be based on next token prediction. It wouldn't be as clean as tokens. So like when the brain is like generating the words that we end up associating with the world, it's not like it's outputting tokens or it's outputting the language in itself. And really, one part of the brain isn't outputting the whole language. Like, you know, when we think about words and language and meaning and all that stuff, this is a collection of contributions from different parts of the brain that are tying all this stuff together, like associations and the motor movements that deal with the word, how we understand how that word is spoken and how it sounds and all that stuff, memories and whatnot. So there's a lot going on there. The problem of meaning and grounding. The professor clarifies that he is not denying that he does not deny consciousness, qualia, or the existence of the physical world. Instead, he posits that human language is a system that hands off information to and from our perceptual and sensory systems, but remains structurally independent of them. So this would be also I wouldn't say a mistake. It's just like we have to be more careful about this. This is analogous to saying that math is something that humans just kind of hand off, and it's not in the physical world, but it's like something that's inherent, like it's transcendent, and we're just kind of leveraging it. When really, yeah, this is really difficult to parse because certainly language is sourced by humans, and like you could say that machines can still do this stuff without humans, but no one would be there to know whether or not it's giving a good answer or not until you have a human perceiver that understands the language and understands whether or not what is coming out at the other end is coherent. So you're still relying on a human that can interpret the culture. And so I wouldn't say that human language is a system that hands off information to and from our perceptual and sensory systems, but remains structurally independent of that. I think it actually remains quite dependent on our perceptual and sensory systems. So this would be I think, a major error here, actually. I would say it's a mistake. All right. Extends his theory to suggest that but I think the reason why people don't like this is because they give humans too much credit. Like, humans themselves we're just dealing with predictions about what is meaningful, about what words mean and what words would imply we're allowed to do with other words and all that. So extends his theory to suggest that the brain itself might operate in a similar non-Markovian autoregressive fashion. Rather than retrieving static facts from a database like memory, our memory consists of continuous context and fixed neural weights that guide our ongoing generation of thought and action. This is 100% right, or at least 100%, I think, on the money. Based on what we've been learning. So yeah, it's not like a word or a phrase has like a fact embedded within it. It's just that for a population that has a pragmatically similar understanding, that would appear to be self-evident to each person in a similar way. However, people understand the world differently. So often there's phrases and words that are inferred differently, and people come away with a different interpretation from what was said or what just happened. So we have to be mindful of that. The search for universal geometry. Highlighting a recent paper on the universal geometry of embeddings, the conversation explores the idea that disparate language models and perhaps human brains share an underlying latent space where concepts are mapped, allowing for translation between radically different linguistic systems. I don't know about this. It might be more so the case that we can leverage mathematical and statistical models and methods in order to, translate these types of things, to figure out how to translate it. It would be akin to trying to translate what like a certain emotion would be like in a different animal. It's like you're taking something that works within one system and trying to figure out how to make it relate to another. I don't know. All right. Reflections on human existence. Toward the end of the episode, the conversation shifts from rigorous science to philosophical reflection. They discuss the potential purpose of life, finding meaning within the framework of a linguistic mind that is fundamentally disconnected from the cosmic whole and the ineffable nature of experiences that language struggles to capture. All right, that's what we're doing. This is us. So yeah, pretty cool. Cool stuff. When was this? And who's this?
I'm gonna get attacked.
Who's he talking to? Oh, he's just talking to us. Or is he talking to someone? He is talking to someone. Oh, this is okay, so who's the guy that's here? Kurt is the host. Professor Ilan Barinholtz. Okay. All right. What was I doing here? I think we finished that. Let's go down. Nope, down left. Awesome. All right, what do we need to do? We need to set some... scene for midstream break, midstream meditation. I have not done that. Remove stream uploads from Discord announcements. Remove stream uploads. Oh, did I not do that yet? That's a bummer. Part 1 referencing effort. Get citations in the document. Oh, this is something I've totally sidelined, but maybe we could sideline this until we do the next version. We're going to have to cite the next version of this document, which is what we are going to start working on. Oh, I kind of had this crazy cool idea. At least I think it's a cool idea. Whoops. So the document kind of just opens up and goes into the document. I think that there should be this landing page and all that. but there should be a page that is basically the outline that hyperlinks to each of the sections so that people can easily find what's going on. Like navigating this tool should be easier than having to jump into a book, which is what it currently kind of is right now. So there's a couple things we got to do. We got to, is part 2 even? No, part 2. Okay, part 1. This is like part 1, 2025. 2025 edition. I think we are going to start on a new one. Maybe putting it like here or something. What would this be called? This is like the guide. Start here. And then we would want something like part 1. Can I add this to this guy? Oh yeah. That's what we want. Part 1. (2025 edition). All right, there we go. Confusing as hell, but yo, Onion Helmet, what's going on here? The type of guy to read Stan, the type of guy messages in chat and say, yep, I'm that type of guy. Awesome. Yo, Ali Faraher, what's good? Welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. How's it going on this fine day? We are so Zach. Absolutely. All right, I'm just getting things ready here. We need a new space for part 1. I gotta make sure this is cleared out. We need a guide, which is basically gonna follow this outline. We want to basically make an outline. All right, let's get back to what I was actually working on here, the roadmap. Oh, look at this, AI viewers. Every time someone asks for a reference at a job interview, I ask them if they've ever heard of the big EDH. Absolutely. That's who I'm putting down. How much of these things did we do? We definitely did not do Stanovich's rationality and the reflective mind, but we did how we think. The neurobiology of certainty, we did do that. The feeling of rightness, we did that. Rationality is emotional is kind of just something we've covered. This was in the video essay. Oh, do we download those? Oh, baby. All right, check these bad boys out. Here we go. This dynamic helps us understand why these are our shorts that I think I'm going to post after the video essay. One day, Stan will see the light keep going. Energy. We'll see the light keep going. Energy. What does that mean? What? These are still a little scuffed, but I think this is just this is the best I can do real quickly. This dynamic helps us understand why human perception is so notoriously fallible. It tells us why we can often see things that aren't physically there. If a top-down prior is overwhelmingly strong or improperly assigned high precision, it can effectively override sensory input, resulting in what we normally call a hallucination. Conversely, it explains why we can fail to see things that are physically right in front of us. If attention and salience systems do not treat a piece of sensory data as relevant, like failing to notice a gorilla walking through a basketball game while we are busy counting passes, it may never become consciously noticeable. This dynamic helps. That's number one. The type of guy to need proper grammar and commas. Absolutely. That's what it's all about. All right, number two. If reality is subjective and my brain is just hallucinating all of this, why can't I just choose to see the sky as green? If it's all in my head, why don't I just jump off a cliff and hallucinate that I can fly? Because the brain is a biological organ embedded in a body, constrained by sensory evidence and the need to remain within viable bounds. If the brain randomly generated a hallucination of a green sky, it would likely create conflict with sensory evidence, capturing our attention while serving no obvious allostatic purpose. It might even distract us from something more important. Worse, if the brain hallucinated that gravity does not apply to us and we stepped off of a cliff, we would die. The body budget goes bankrupt and the living system loses the organization it was fighting to maintain. So we consciously and viscerally feel that jumping off a cliff would hurt because the model has to treat that fact as non-negotiable in order to keep us alive. All right, that was number two. I've sped up like me talking. I've made much more zoomer cuts in between what I say, and the music is louder. It's just, we're trying to get dopamine. Now, granted, I should have a lot more pictures in a video like that, but I just don't want to get more B-roll. I'm just B-rolled it out. Oh, here we go. Classic. Imagine looking at a picture of a dog, but its lower half is hidden behind a brick wall. Because the dog's legs are occluded, our retina sends zero bottom-up data about them to our visual cortex. Under the old filter model, the visual cortex mapping that occluded area should be quiet, or merely filtering the brick wall signals. Instead, these studies found that top-down feedback appeared to fill the specific blind region of the primary visual cortex with neural activity corresponding to the missing legs. This was striking evidence that the brain was doing something much closer to filling in the scene than merely filtering the incoming signal. All right. Vsauce potential, yeah. Split brain. What we experience as conscious reasoning often arrives downstream, interpreting, organizing, and sometimes rationalizing processes that were already underway. In patients whose left and right brain hemispheres had been surgically disconnected, dramatically limiting communication between the two sides, researchers flashed the command "walk" to the patient's right hemisphere. The patient stood up and began walking. When asked why he had stood up, the language-dominant left hemisphere had to answer, even though it lacked access to the original command. We might expect the answer to be, "I don't know." Instead, the patient fabricated a coherent narrative. "I'm going to the kitchen to get a Coke." The unsettling implication is that when the body acts, consciousness can produce a plausible reason after the fact. And because that reason feels coherent and fluent, we may genuinely experience ourselves as the rational author of the thought whose causes began outside our awareness. All right. And then the final one. Consider reading a text message with a typo. Because you know your friend and understand the context of the conversation, your brain forms a strong expectation about what the sentence is supposed to say. The brain effectively turns down the volume on the mismatch. If the typo is small enough, you might not even notice it. However, if you then hear someone talking in the other room and you thought you were home alone, that signal is treated as sharp, sudden, and highly reliable. The brain cranks up the volume. If the brain determines that things are getting worse, perhaps you don't recognize the voice. Uncertainty increases, the body initiates a stress response, and the brain redirects your attention. But if the brain determines that things are better than expected, perhaps you realize the voice is only your roommate, uncertainty collapses. What a relief. Now, you may have already learned that dopamine is not strictly a pleasure molecule, but it is deeply tied to reward, motivation, and learning. Why is that? Because dopamine helps the brain update which predictions are worth trusting in the future. Roughly speaking, when activity flows through the brain, it leaves behind temporary traces of which circuits were involved. Then, when a salient uncertainty is successfully resolved, dopaminergic signaling floods those tagged circuits, altering their plasticity, potentially making the connections more likely to strengthen, stabilize, or be reused in the future. By changing the physical weighting of these connections, the brain alters its expectations for the next time it enters a similar situation. You hadn't remembered that your roommate told you they now work from home on Tuesdays, but now you will. All right. Add the Vsauce music. Is it allowed? Is it free use music? So that's all I got so far. I think the next one I was working on was the outfielder one, the fly ball one. So that would be pretty cool as well. So chances are I will trickle these out after the video essay's out. Ooh, only using your mouth. Oh no. Guaranteed interactions. All right, so we did enough of social allostasis to get that under our belt for now. We can dive back into that later. Developing the self interface. So the idea was, like, given that we're in this position and we have a subjective view and we can only kind of reflect upon things that we notice, like, how should we think about, like, the interface that we have here? And I didn't really get too far in this topic, but that wasn't because we didn't try. It's just that I don't think that this might not be the way we want to go about that. All right, pragmatically similar understandings. I think we did fine on that. Reasoning and logic. We had our good reasons day, which was probably good enough for that. Bayesian reasoning, we did that day. We didn't do logical fallacies, but I don't know if we need to do this one yet. I'm still waiting for the call from Alex O'Connor to work on that video with him. So we might be still waiting a couple years. We did the what is a good reason. All right. So who is this Stanovich and rationality? Who is this Stanovich and what do they have to do with rationality? And what do they have to do with rationality and the reflective mind? Yo, Daniel N, Stan Pack, the Man Pack. How's it going? Logical fallacies don't exist. Wow. I couldn't possibly prove you wrong. All right, here we go. Keith E. Stanovich. It's not even his first name. Come on. A cognitive scientist best known for working on reasoning, intelligence, rationality, cognitive biases, and reading in rationality circles. He is especially associated with the idea that being intelligent is not the same thing as being rational. Interesting. His key point: IQ tests measure some cognitive abilities, but they miss many traits needed for good judgment, such as probabilistic reasoning, resisting cognitive biases, thinking actively and open-mindedly, and using the right mindware. Okay, I remember this whole discussion. So this might be something akin to wisdom. I'm not sure. Or what people intuit as wisdom, I mean. Oh, argues that classic System 1 versus System 2 dual process theory is too crude. Yep, we say that all the time here. And then he proposed the tripartite model of autonomous mind, algorithmic mind, and then reflective mind. Okay, I remember having beef with that, though. What is there to learn here, though? What is there to learn here, though? Like, what are the main points for someone that's already bought into the idea that the System 1 versus System 2 dichotomy is way too simplistic, that System 2 is often embedded within System 1 anyway, that our thinking and heuristics are products of evolution, that we only really interface with them through consciousness, which we can think of as a subset of the output of those processes, since a lot of that remains unconscious. I understand that this isn't all simply cognitive, as if there was nothing emotional involved, that we do rely on affect and interoception for our rational thinking. And this doesn't necessarily mean that all these heuristics are inherently negative biases. A lot of these help us out a ton, or we can make sense of how they might have helped us out in the past and may still be able to help us out now, even though they aren't perfectly in line with what we colloquially think is perfect rationality in some theoretical sense. All right, what else do we want to say about that? Everyone thinks they have good reasons. That's the point, right? Everyone thinks they're rational. And the question is, what does being rational then mean? Is it something inherent about human thinking? We could think in that way. Or we could think of it in the sense that we have these like developed norms about what rationality ought to be. And, you know, if you were to not abide by those norms, then we would say you're not being rational, which is kind of how we colloquially talk about it. All right, leave it to the so-called free thinkers and rationalists to resort to the logical fallacy of ad hominem when you rage bait them. Could we get any comments on the fact that some channel users have recklessly and slanderously said you would probably embezzle money as the Stan Richardson treasurer? We won't name names or anything, but some people did say that. Sorry, I can't answer this question without my lawyer and a Nietzschean Redditor present. All right, we've got to have a Nietzschean Redditor at least. I don't know if there's any lawyers watching this stream. What else do we want here? All this to say that I certainly find the conclusion that smart people measured at least by IQ can still be irrational, in the sense that we often recognize or at least use the word rational. But what is there? But what does he offer that is distinct? And not merely some semantic conceptualization from all that I discussed, such as his tripartite structure, comma, which I might even say is similarly inappropriate to a two-system structure, even if it is slightly less inappropriate than the two-system structure. Okay. What do we got from that? All right, so this was April and May, but May was supposed to be the part 1 revamping, but we have to now push that off to June. June was the part 1 revamping, but it's actually the document in its entirety revamping in some sense. This is going to be the ESRD revamp. Full cap. Not full cap, but full caps. No cap. June is creativity. Why do we want to talk about creativity? I think we have to rethink these upcoming topics. I think we might want to actually just start where we... Actually, I don't know. The nice thing about doing this type of... when I say this revamp, I think we should work on the outline of the entire document and just not go deep into any topic right now, but like just structure the document and make sure it makes sense. Like, okay, we have to go through this. Like, essentially, I want to get to the point where I can make a video that basically walks through everything that we plan on doing on this channel and then asking, hey, like, what are we missing? And then we can jump around from topic to topic as we go, each month, so that we don't get too bored in one area and we can play around with different types of topics, start developing different types of ideas. I think that might be more fun. Oh, I do still want to do vibe coding, but there's no reason to yet. Right? I don't know. We'll see. Maybe we do a vibe coding week in the summer. All right, I think your skepticism is basically right. Stanovich is not most valuable as a literal architecture of mind theorist. The tripartite model can look like just another tidy box diagram imposed on messy cognition. The more useful contribution is different. He turns rationality from a vague virtue word into a set of separable failure modes, measurable dispositions, and correctable competencies. That is the part worth learning. The key move is not three systems, but splitting intelligence from rationality. Okay. The sharper point is that this is not just an anecdotal paradox. It implies that standard intelligence measures omit important cognitive competencies. That's fine. Algorithmic capacity would be something like IQ, right? It's just like straight up, what are your CPU specs? But it doesn't tell us anything about the software running or the firmware running on the CPU. So you could be really fast at terrible responses. The horsepower for it. Why would power have anything to do with this in this analogy? All right. Oh, this could be a good idea. Reflective mind is mainly about epistemic governance. The reflective mind is not just consciousness, introspection, or deliberation. It is more like the part of cognition that sets epistemic policy. So the questions at the reflective level include, do I want the true answer or do I want a defensible answer? But we never do that type of reflective thinking automatically. Should I treat my intuition as evidence? So what is he saying? Stanovich's framework does not require thinking emotions are irrational noise. Reflective rationality includes knowing when to trust, distrust. Yes, but it wouldn't be like having conscious thoughts like this. Like, this is a way we can make sense of what someone does or what someone goes through, but it's not like someone actually has these types of thoughts in their mind when they're going through whether or not they should do something or not. All right, I think I don't like this space. I don't like what he's dealing with right now. Rationality is partly measurable. And he's trying to come up with a rationality quotient. He reframes rationality as two related goals. Okay. Slow thinking can be post hoc defense. The reflective question is whether the deliberation is governed by truth-sensitive norms. Yeah, that's speculative. Okay, I think we gotta run. We gotta run away. Did I still have that here? Yes, okay, so that's cut. We did that. Read through of conceptualizing our understanding. I did film it. So that's somewhere. I still have to edit that. Read through recent r/philosophy posts. Should we just do that now? Should we do some fun r/philosophy? I think we did actually do this on a stream once recently. So I don't know if there's much new that would be a ton of fun for us right now, but we could always try. Would we be able to get a sense of that? Now let's just do past month. We don't need that guy. Oh my gosh, what to do when you hate your own species according to Buddhism. Jeez. You can do everything right and things can still go wrong. Oh man. This is kind of cool. Hegel haunts us all. We gotta hit that one up. I don't know what to even check into here. Oh, deepfakes and the ethics of digital representation. Idealism may not be what you think. All right, we'll give that one a go. Tom is about to pop up. Don't hold back. I got recommended that video. Hatred is one of the 3 poisons. Absolutely. All right, what's happening here? Is this is he going over books? No, he's just talking through it. The profound influence of Hegel on modern philosophy and his role in the split between analytic and continental traditions. The video explains that while Kant established a wall between human perception and the unknowable thing in itself with a gap, Hegel rejected this boundary, viewing the mind not as a fixed structure, but as something that evolves through history. Kind of goated for that one. Proposed that reality moves through a dialectic, a process where contradictions drive growth and transformation, right? This is a good way to maybe intuit this if you didn't know anything about the underlying neuroscience, but now we know the neuroscience, so we don't really need the dialectic anymore, unless we're trying to make sense of the contents of our understanding. So how the contents of our understanding develop over time. This is a way that we can like theorize that, even though really what's going on is a really complicated system that we could connect to predictive processing and salience and precision weighting and all that. The video recounts the famous moment in 1806 where when Hegel witnessed Napoleon Bonaparte riding through Jena, and described it as seeing the world spirit on horseback, representing history unfolding through a single figure. After Hegel's death, his followers split. Marx turned the dialectic toward material conditions and class conflict, while Kierkegaard rebelled against the system's neglect of the individual. This tension eventually contributed to the birth of analytic philosophy in England, which prioritized logic and clarity over the grand totalizing system of Hegelianism. Okay. I think that's all we need. Wait a second. This is in r/philosophy? This is a self-post? Oh my gosh, we get to do this then. What was I worried about? Is this it? Is this not a self-post? Oh, I probably should just contact the moderators for pre-approval. Okay. We got to try that then. Kierkegaard? Did Hegel actually witness Napoleon? I'm not sure. I feel like there's just weird encounters between these like famous people. Like they just see stuff that you would never expect. All right. What's going on with this guy? Idealism may not be what you think. It increasingly strikes us that the reason why many scientists and scholars reject idealism, the notion that reality is essentially mental, is based on simple misunderstandings of what idealism states or implies. We would like to discuss and correct some of these misunderstandings. An often repeated criticism of idealism is that the obvious existence of an external world of tables and chairs, independent of our thoughts, wishes, or fantasies, contradicts idealism. But this is not true. Idealists, even subjective idealists a la Berkeley, let alone objective or analytic idealists, acknowledge the existence of an external world independent of our personal mentation. They simply state that such external world in and of itself is also mental in essence, just as the inner life of another person is mental, even though not constituted of our mentation. Oh. It's also mental in essence, just not our mentation. That's going to be tough. I can't co-sign on that one. Like, if I'm going to characterize the external world in a way that's mental, it has to be through someone's mentation. And if we were to make a distinction about the external world being mental, then it would have to be one in which we, as always, prioritize the experience over the theoretical external world with which we are dealing with. I love Shakara. The world is and is not. Oh, Shankara. I see. There's no way that he was just strolling and Napoleon was dripped out riding his horse. Hey, you never know. I wouldn't be surprised if Hegel could teleport. He was that good. All right, the external world is not in your mind, your or our minds alone, but unfolds instead in a spatially unbound field of subjectivity underlying all nature, in the same sense that quantum field. So this is all so speculative. So speculative. Not necessarily plausible at all, given the evidence we know. In other words, the external world is what the thoughts of nature's mind at large look like when observed from our vantage point. Yes, so this is really discounting all the stuff we understand about the brain and this whole story of evolution and regulation and all that. So I really can't give this too much light of day, unfortunately. So we got to skedaddle. Okay. Oh, you know what? We got to do this guy. I don't know if Reclusi's here. Actually, no. Who's big on the eliminativism, or who keeps saying that I'm a eliminativist? Was that Daniel End? Was that you? Or was that Reclusi? That was Onion Helmet as well? Is that everyone? All right, let's dive in. As you can see, I don't have like an agenda for the day, let's just say. Who's she in this regard? Yeah, all of us. All right. Is a materialist position in philosophy of mind that expresses the idea that the majority of mental states in folk psychology do not exist. Oh, I got to figure out what that means. Some supporters of eliminativism argue that no coherent neural basis will be found for many everyday psychological concepts such as belief or desire, since they are poorly defined. The argument is that psychological concepts of behavior and experience should be judged by how well they reduce to the biological level. Other versions entail the non-existence of conscious mental states such as pain and visual perceptions. So just intuitively, though, I do think that we would be able to get to the point where we have the technology in which we would be able to measure someone's brain and say they are showing signs of strong belief or desire, even though we don't have like a really clear understanding of like, no, I shouldn't say that. Even though we don't have like a definite understanding of what belief would mean, we'd be able to get a bunch of people who say that they are believing something strongly in the moment, and we would use that as training data for this model, and then we would be able to figure out if someone's doing something that the model believes is expressing a belief or a desire in that sense. We could also try to tie desire to something that makes sense in our own understanding, like certain affect, certain emotions. We would be able to then know when someone is desiring something. I mean, we already do that in experiments and whatnot. So I think we would be able to find desire in the brain. And then belief would be, I mean, belief is inherent in all experience usually. So unless it's not like anxious, high norepinephrine modes, or maybe high epinephrine modes. The argument, okay, eliminativism about a class of entities is the view that the class of entities does not exist. For example, materialism tends to be eliminativist about the soul. Modern chemists are eliminativist about phlogiston. Modern biologists are eliminativist about elan vital. And modern physicists are eliminativist about luminiferous ether or ether. Eliminative materialism is the relatively new idea that certain classes of mental entities that common sense takes for granted, such as beliefs, desires, and the subjective sensations of pain, do not exist. Yeah, I wouldn't go this far. This is crazy. I feel like this is wild. What would it mean for the subjective sensation of pain to not exist? I think people I feel like people usually think about these things as a higher status than they deserve. If we're going to talk about this in like a grounded materialist way, or an empirical way. So then it makes it seem like just because we're pulling back and trying to ground it, it might seem like I'm trying to eliminate them, but I'm really just trying to ground them. Okay. No semantics. I don't think you're a limitativist except when you speak about phenomenology. Ooh. What parts of I feel like when I speak about phenomenology, I usually make it then seem like that's the only thing that exists. You know, the priority of meaning is phenomenology here, or in all of our discussions. Yo, it's that AI review guy. Absolutely. How's it going? What's good in okay life? When you say it's not part of reality. Okay. It's less about the idea that there is a reality with, like, that things can be a part of. Like, I'm not trying to say that it's special in that it's not part of a reality that is there. I'm trying to say that this idea of talking about a reality as absolute in some sense would be inappropriate. And when we're talking about reality, we could be meaning multiple things, and we just have to be clear about which one we're talking about, what context we're talking about, and then we have to make sure that we follow the rules of whatever context that is. So if we're talking about reality as what we experience, the reality of our experience, when I think that my reality right now, like, we could talk about stuff in that realm, and that would be the realm of phenomenology. And in which case, I think that there are opportunities in my reality. There is thoughts in my reality. There is sensations of pain in my reality, and all that stuff. Now, if we're going to talk about the reality of the physical world, and we were to talk about pain, then we have to talk about specific brain activity. That's what that would be. We just need to be careful about how we talk about some of these things, because we can make it sound like we're implying something that we don't want to imply, or that we're not allowed to imply. All right. I get you. If you say it's not part of reality, it seems like it's eliminated, right? So I don't want to say that something's not part of reality. That I should be more careful if I say something like that. Your reality is part of reality. No, I would say let's not talk about reality in that way. We're not allowed to say that there is a reality with which all of our realities are a part of. Like, that wouldn't make sense. That wouldn't be an appropriate way to talk about reality, because then it can imply that there's some grand reality. That would be. I'm comfortable talking about the reality with which within which each person experiences the world. Yeah, each person, we could say, has their own subjective reality. And then we could say that the physical world is reality, right? We could just say that that is reality. And in that sense, I wouldn't say that someone's subjective reality is like within the physical world's reality, right? In the reality of the physical world. Like that wouldn't be an appropriate connection. We'd have to be more precise, right? We'd have to say something like within the physical world reality, the way of thinking about reality as the physical world, we can make sense of the reality, the subjective realities that each person experiences as the neural activity that they each, have in their own brain and body. So yeah, we can. It would be. I'm flagging the idea that like my reality is part of a more holistic reality. I'm trying to be eliminativist about the idea that there is a single right way to talk about reality that is encompassing all other ways of talking about reality. All right, EMs just say there's no more to it than chemistry. A belief is nothing special. It's just a particular brain state and neural activity patterns. Okay, that's what I would say, right? I would say that. If we were going to go real physicalist, we can do that, right? But once again, like we are operating in this space where we each have these subjective experiences that are much more meaningful than just the mere physicalist view. So we can't just talk about beliefs as the brain state and the activity patterns, because practically we want to talk about beliefs as things that we have, things that we can leverage. So these are just different contexts. So we have to be careful about what context we're talking in. This is why it's always pragmatic. It's what you're allowed to say in a context is a pragmatic thing. It's like a pragmatic, whatever it is, exercise, practice, game. It's a pragmatic game. It's a pragmatic social normative system. Now who's talking metaphysics? Yeah, I feel like at the bedrock here, it's a talk about pragmatism, and then it's like we could talk about metaphysics, but we're talking about metaphysics within like the pragmatism of like metaphysics in different contexts. Like metaphysics, in my mind, isn't a exercise in like saying what is absolutely true. It's like conceptualizing the behavior of a certain metaphysical system in some sense. Just like how there's like laws of physics, it's like what are the laws of your metaphysics. Pain as a concept, EMs are usually nominalists. Not always, but usually. Okay, what are nominalists? So we don't think concepts exist. That isn't to say pain receptors. Yes, so I think I'm not comfortable with this use of exists. Exists is way too ambiguous as to whether it's referring to whether or not it has some special status in the physical world view, or if it has some special status in the subjective phenomenological view. Concepts would have crazy special status in the first person subjective phenomenal view. We can't just say that concepts don't exist when we're talking about conscious experience. And then when we're talking about the physical world, we can't say that these concepts are doing anything more than just being brain activity. So we have to be just clear about what we're talking about. Right. It does seem so, but that's the problem. Like we need to just be, we get out of semantic trouble when we're not ambiguous with our words, the way that we're describing these things. So my concern is that eliminativism, this view, might be too ambiguous as to what it might be asserting, and I don't like that type of ambiguity, because I think it might imply something to someone. Someone might infer something that isn't what I would want them to infer. It's not something I actually believe or feel that I believe. Okay. Eliminativism about propositional attitudes. Mental state held by an agent or organism toward a proposition can be considered to be neurally realized, causally efficacious, content-bearing internal state. What would it mean for to be content-bearing, though? That's the question. And then about qualia. In the context of materialist understandings of psychology, eliminativism is the opposite of reductive materialism, arguing that mental states as conventionally understood do exist and directly correspond to the physical state of the nervous system. Yeah, I feel like even though this is also ambiguous, this might even be a little more appropriate, though, than the other one, at least in my intuition. An intermediate position, revisionary materialism, often argues that the mental state in question will prove to be somewhat reducible to physical phenomena, with some changes needed to be to the common sense concept. Yeah, so now this is implying that there's like aspects of it that are in the external physical world that aren't reducible to that thing. So like the question is, what do we mean by reducible to physical phenomena? Are we asserting that there's some special something else in the universe? So I don't know. I'm having trouble here. I don't want to get near something like this just because it's going to put me into a box that I don't want to be in. I hope that my views are a little more nuanced. Arguably claims that future research will fail to find a neuronal basis for various mental phenomena. We will find the neuronal basis for various mental phenomena. In theory, we'd be able to find it for all the mental phenomena that we care about, that we find empirically significant. Oh, wait. That future research will fail. What does this mean? It may need to... Is this a sentence? Since eliminative materialism arguably claims that future research will fail to find a neuronal basis for various mental phenomena, it may need to wait for science to progress further. Okay, right. We do. One might question the position on these grounds, but philosophers like Churchland argue that eliminativism is often necessary in order to open the minds of thinkers to new evidence and better explanations. Views closely related to eliminativism include illusionism and quietism. Okay, who rejected the idea of the self on the ground that it was not based on any impression. Most arguments for the view are based on the assumption that people's common sense view of the mind is actually an implicit theory or a perception. Oh, actually, that wouldn't be the same thing. This is a different one. Okay, it's actually an implicit theory. It's implied. It is to be compared and contrasted with other scientific theories in its explanatory success, accuracy, and ability to predict the future. Eliminativists argue that common sense folk psychology has failed and will eventually need to be replaced by explanations derived from neuroscience. These philosophers therefore tend to emphasize the importance of neuroscientific research as well as developments in artificial intelligence. Yeah, I guess this is already kind of shown true just with what we just talked about with Anil Seth, that his interpretation of self as a perception is quite profound, and it was afforded to us by the neuroscience. Philosophers who argue against eliminativism may take several approaches. So there, we could always find like the similarities here between what I usually say and eliminativism. It's just that eliminativism is too constraining, I think, in this regard, or perhaps just still too ambiguous. I'm not sure. All right. Eliminativism maintains that the common sense understanding of the mind is mistaken And that, so yeah, mistaken in, under what criteria though? And that neuroscience will one day reveal that mental states talked about in everyday discourse using words such as intend, believe, desire, and love do not refer to anything real. What would that mean though? Why, like, I guess, like this sentence presupposes that there's like something in this category of real that is transcendent. And I think that would be a mistake. Because of the inadequacy of natural languages, people mistakenly think that they have such beliefs and desires. Some eliminativists, such as Frank Jackson, claim that consciousness does not exist except as an epiphenomenon of brain function. Okay. Claim that the concept will eventually be eliminated as neuroscience progresses. Why would we eliminate the concept of consciousness even if we figure out more about it? Consciousness and folk psychology are separate issues, and it is possible to take an eliminative stance on one but not the other. Oh no, the roots of eliminativism go back to the writings of Sellers, Quine, Faraben, and Rorty. The term eliminative materialism was first introduced by James Kornman in 1968 while describing a version of physicalism endorsed by Rorty. The later Wittgenstein was also an important inspiration for eliminativism, particularly with his attack on private objects as grammatical fictions. Okay. Real/exist equals has ontology. Right, but when we say has ontology, like what do we mean here? Like does it check out that when I say that we could think about ontology in a couple different ways, or I should just say does that check out? Does that make sense? That we could think about ontology in a couple different ways. When we're talking about from our subjective experience, there's this meaning that we feel like we're dealing with, right? It feels like things mean things. And we've come to see that that's a huge aspect of our perception. And it's internally generated, but it's affected. What becomes internally generated is affected by our interaction with whatever, right? We make sense of what we're interacting with as stimuli, the physical world, etc. But we get to make sense of it in that way because we have such predictive power in our controlled hallucination here. So I can do things like pick up a pen and swing it around and stuff like that. Even though when I think about pen, I'm only dealing with my internal generation of like meaning. So this is one in which ontology has to do with internal models, which creates an experience that is filled with meaning. Everything is significant. From this, like if I were to now theorize, I have to do this through my own subjective view, but I'm now going to theorize about this physical world that is decoupled from a subjective being. And if we were to think about ontology within the physical world, I mean, I actually don't like doing that. I don't like putting ontology in the physical world. But I think this is what people like to do. They like to just say that there's some separate ontology from human beings, and that's some space. So whether that is the physical world or it's some other space in the universe, whatever, like that's harder for me to do because we only, like, meaning for people is just experience. It's not that like people access the greater experience through subjective experiences. It's literally that meaning is like an expression of experience. That's it. It's just the expression of experience. It's not anything else elsewhere. So that's why when we talk about ontology, I like to think about it only through the lens of phenomenology and and subjective experience. Spengler just keeps winning. Wittgenstein and Quine coming as well, poggers. Yeah, I don't know if any of this stuff is checking out. I don't know. I guess I don't know. This goes back to what I was saying yesterday. I just need more feedback. You know, I say all these things and I get so little feedback. I have no idea how to improve upon what I'm saying. So, yeah, unfortunately, until then, or until I find like really, I don't know, compelling thinkers or concepts that take into what take in this type of separation into account in its philosophy, then unfortunately I just kind of have to keep developing these things. Like I felt like I really leveled up when I was reading Brandom and stuff, and that was 2 years ago, and that really tied the idea of semantics as some objective thing to the subjective pragmatism of a human being. Now, granted, that's not what he was like really trying to do, but that's what it ended up doing for me, because he connected it to social practices. And you know, social practices at the end of the day are just physical organisms interacting with each other. And so, yeah, that's where it all kind of came in. Where is E? That is a good question. E literally came in here, suggested a video. I reacted to the video, and nothing else. He disappeared. I also have to apologize. I'm using the wrong pronoun, but it is based. Irish goodbye. The big EDH goodbye. All right. Okay, what's going on here? Are there any more modern developments that have come from eliminativism? Specifically, taking into account the nuance of eliminative materialism and then perhaps deriving more contemporary or developed philosophies from that? Like, is a neuropragmatism simply adjacent to eliminative materialism, or is it a child of it? Can you help me better understand this space? All right, this will get us going. Here we go. I like it when Big E pops off. True, it keeps me on my toes. They keep me on my toes. Okay. Eliminative materialism is not so much the parent of neuropragmatism as one of the pressures that helped make neuropragmatism attractive. Neuropragmatism is more like a cousin or downstream neighbor. It shares eliminativism's suspicion that inherited mental vocabulary may mislead us, but it usually does not inherit the strong eliminativist thesis that beliefs, desires, pains, selves, or meanings simply do not exist. Classical eliminative materialism, the strong thesis, says that ordinary folk psychology may be radically false on the strongest version. Mental categories such as belief, desire, intention, or perhaps qualia do not successfully refer to real things and will not appear in a mature science of the mind. All right. The key nuance is that eliminative materialism is not just reductionism, which says beliefs are real, but they are ultimately brain states, computational states, functional states, or some other scientifically respectable kind of state. Okay, so this is the part of eliminativism that I'm usually fine with, at least as long as we're talking about the physical world here. Eliminativism says the category belief, as folk psychology understands it, may be more like demon possession or phlogiston, a failed theoretical. So like in the sense that's analogous to a failed theoretical posit, not something to be identified with a real scientific kind. SCP's distinction is helpful here. Either mental notions refer to something real and can be reduced, or they do not pick out anything real and should be eliminated. So I disagree with either. In like a fundamental sense. So the interesting thing is, like, from the first person subjective experience sense, anything that can be noticed is real, right? Or anything that is noticed is real, I should say. Anything that arrives in experience would be real as far as that context is concerned, right? A thought pops up and it means something. Boom, that thing exists. It's real. As far as your experience is concerned. All right, a softer contemporary development, revision, not elimination. A lot of more recent work is not cleanly eliminativist, but revisionary. It says folk psychology is crude, but not totally empty. We may keep terms like belief, desire, emotion, perception, blah, 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 while radically changing what we mean by them. This produces positions such as revisionary materialism / revisionary physicalism. Mental state vocabulary may survive, but only after being scientifically reconstructed. We got neurophilosophy associated especially with Churchland. This takes neuroscience as central to philosophy of mind. It can be eliminativist in spirit, but it need not always say folk concepts are wholly unreal. Naturalized intentionality and representation theories. Instead of eliminating belief or content, philosophers try to explain how neural, biological, computational, or embodied systems can genuinely be about things. Embodied and active, extended, and ecological cognition, the 4E. These often reject the picture of mind as inner symbolic manipulation. They are not necessarily eliminativist, but they may eliminate or demote certain internalist concepts. All right. Fictionalism says belief, desire, talk may be useful without being literally true in the way ordinary realism assumes. That's kind of what I'm looking for. We might keep saying she believes the meeting is at noon because it works socially and practically, but not because science must find a discrete belief object in the brain. This is it. This is where I'm at. That's what I've been saying more closely. That's kind of what I'm saying. So fictionalism, instrumentationalism, right? There's a pragmatism here. So one modern legacy of eliminativism is not universal deletion of mental terms. It is the weaker but powerful idea. Do not assume that common sense mental categories carve nature at its joints. All right, where neuropragmatism fits. It comes primarily from the pragmatist tradition, Dewey, James, Mead, Sellers, naturalism, embodied action, social inquiry, and the continuity of organism and environment. Solomozzi and Schuck's neuropragmatism, a neurophilosophical... Oh, did I say the wrong thing? Not neuropragmatism, neopragmatism. Oh my gosh, what am I doing here? What is neuropragmatism? Presents it as a scientifically informed treatment of cognition, knowledge, body, mind. What is neuropragmatism? How should philosophy reconstruct its concepts of mind, knowledge, agency, value, and social life once we take neuroscience and... Yo, this is a good find. So neuropragmatism is not simply eliminative materialism plus pragmatism. It is a pragmatist naturalism updated by neuroscience. Okay, embarrassingly so. I actually meant neo-pragmatism when I was asking the original question, but I am happy to learn about neuropragmatism, as that does seem to be in line with what I think is now necessary, given that we are learning more about the brain and about what might be contributing to consciousness and what contributes to perception and all that, or at least effective ways to explain those things. Okay, what do we got? Anything we can experience exists. How does that work with something like unicorns? This is where the idea of concepts is really nice. It's like, certainly when you're thinking about a unicorn, the concept of the unicorn exists. It is something that is possible in your mind. But the thing I'm trying to hammer home is, just because something exists in the sense that it's conceptually there, or it's something that, you know, we can make sense of as being possible as far as your own mind's concerned, that doesn't mean anything about the world outside of your mind, right? We're just describing your mind. When we talk about reality, we can't mix the what's in your mind and the outside of your mind. That's how subjective experience is. We can either talk about reality from within a subjective experience, or we can talk about it from a theoretical physical world sense. But we can't start acting as if there's just things in the world that, you know, make sense because we think certain things subjectively, and then we're giving it some status that it doesn't deserve. So certainly the category or the concept of a unicorn exists, provided that you think about it, just like how you lost the game. All right. My thinking is that from a more mature neo-pragmatist perspective, the idea of putting so much weight on existence or reality and leaving that ambiguous would be incredibly inappropriate, in the sense that it would lead to people inferring things that we might not want them to infer. So I would say that the most philosophically robust perspective on this discussion would actually be some sort of pragmatism, where we have to talk about what we are doing with our communication when we're leveraging these certain words and phrases. And then we can get into some more concrete discussions, such as fictionalism or neuropragmatism, where now we're talking about how we perhaps ought to explain or use certain concepts such that they are both grounded in neuroscience, but also our intuitions, which will be, according to neuroscience and our broader sciences, affected by our cultures and our educations and all that. So we would not want to simplify our positions into something as rigid, ambiguous, I need another word here. As rigid, ambiguous, and in a pragmatist perspective, and from a pragmatist perspective, inappropriate, and therefore, okay, that's what I'm going to run with. Hopefully I'm talking through these ideas in any which way that's makes sense. Okay, does the concept of unicorns exist in the same way the sun exists? Right, so this is where instrumentalism is a nice way to think about this. Like when you're thinking that the sun exists, this is why we go into this idea of affective realism and all this stuff, like why you feel as though the sun exists, right? And you say, well, yeah, but we know the sun exists. And I'm once again saying that the reason why you can say, it's so obvious that the sun exists is because of something that's going on in your brain right now. And it's creating this experience for you that makes it so obvious that this objective thing exists, when really it's just your subjective experience that's bringing that out. But the instrumentalist side of this is you are communicating something, And even though your model is subjective, like in theory, you're going to communicate something. And even if someone were to disagree with you, you'd be able to ask like 5 other people and they would all agree with you. So like there's something instrumental about that. So the idea is that we've arrived over time at a concept of a sun that's like, roughly shared amongst us. Like we have pragmatically similar understandings of a sun, even though we each have a different understanding of a sun, right? People know more about a sun scientifically. People like sun in different ways. When people think about the sun, they might be thinking about its associations with other aspects of their life, maybe sunburn. So even though we kind of when we're talking socially, we operate within this space of like a theoretical reality. Like I'll give you that. Like there's this inherent theoretical reality that we each commit to, right? It's like this theoretical, this is a space of meaning that is shared between us all. And that's like a useful, like I think that's a useful, developed mechanism that our species has developed for coordinating with one another. So when we talk about a sun, even though your experience is subjective and my experience is subjective, you communicate something to me and it affects an experience in me that makes it feel like what you're saying is something that is true in this shared space of truth. So yeah, this is why when we start talking about these things, like we have to make sense of like what realm we're actually talking in here, what context, because the sun is fine. Like, and usually when we're talking about the physical world, it's fine, right? It's very easy to connect like my intuition about what a pen is or what the sun is to the thing itself. The problem is we interact in really ambiguous territory most of the time, or a lot of the time. I shouldn't say most of the time, a lot of the time. So people would say, oh, it's definitely true that this thing is the case, and people would disagree, and you'd be like, how the hell do those people disagree? They must be stupid. But really, this is a subjective thing we're dealing with. And just because it's really easy to empirically point out or justify your understanding of the sun, it's not the same for more ambiguous topics or interpretations or understandings of certain concepts. So rather than just say that there's like objective facts and subjective opinions, we have to really ground this all in the subjective, because that's really what's happening at the end of the day. That's what our science tells us is happening at the end of the day. There's no magical space where there's just like this shared realm of facts. There's just people's brains. And as we discussed in the perception video, when people are interacting with one another, they tend to create an equilibrium in some sense of understanding for the sake of their regulation, and for the sake of not conflicting, and for the sake of being able to coordinate and communicate effectively. And of course, this stuff happens over many years. Many years. And then I don't know. Okay. Horns. I don't even know what that's from, but I like it. I'm a neuropragmatist. It's the only way. I'm digging neuropragmatism, so we gotta learn more about that. What was the answer? Yes or no, or I don't know. What was the answer to what? Does the concept of unicorns exist in the same way that the sun exists? The answer would be the concept of a unicorn exists in an analogous way that the concept of the sun exists as you experience it, right? So we both experience these in a way where we can like notice them in our own minds. But if we were to say that like we're actually in the context of what things can we find in the physical world, then we would say that, you know, now we're in the context of the physical world. We could find the fun in the sun. We could find the fun in the unicorn, probably. We could find the sun in the physical world. We couldn't find the unicorn in the physical world. So this is just one of the examples where just me being a little more precise in the language makes it so that it's easier to separate these two things we're trying to say. So this is why when I talk about concepts, I'm not talking about what's in the physical world. I'm talking about what we experience. And I'm just using concept. It's not like we find concepts in the brain. Concept is just a useful way for us to communicate and think about what is going on in our brain. In terms of, I'm sorry, what's going on in our experience. I shouldn't say what's going on in our brain. What's going on in our experience? What's going on in the qualia space? How do we make sense of that? That's where like metaphysics comes into play. Like you're making a physics about the qualia space. That's the cool thing about metaphysics. I don't want to actually assert anything about the physical world when I'm talking about metaphysics. I'm trying to talk about what these things that we're dealing with are in our own experience. Okay. But the point of view only works if you think you're the only person that exists and everyone else is here just for your entertainment. One is fiction, one is not. Well, I don't think that's the case, because my understanding, my own subjective understanding of the physical world affords me an understanding of the brain that affords me the understanding that every other human organism is having a similar experience from their own point of view. And their own experience, according to my understanding of the physical brain, is completely different. Now we could say that it's similar in certain structural ways, and we can only try to speculate what those structural ways are. I'll point back to the video essay. But in terms of what we each understand about the contents of experience, there are differences there. And we can only make sense of those differences pragmatically in terms of what behavior we each express. So we could say that we have pragmatically similar understandings if we're able to discuss this stuff in a conversation and make sense of it. And it would be pragmatically dissimilar if like I say something and you try to kill me because of what I just said or something like that. But that's just, it's a rough way of trying to make sense of this, because at the end of the day, there's just this type of social regulation such that when I say something, it affects some chemical cascade in your own brain that affects your experience, your subjective experience, and that'll affect what you say back, which is then going to affect a cascade in my brain. That's going to affect an experience in my view, and then that's going to affect what I say back. And that's kind of all what's happening. And then scientists have discovered that when you put two physical human beings in this physical space, they become a coupled system, a physical system in which they both try to regulate each other by, one, expressing what they understand, and two, by aligning their understanding with the understanding of the other person, so that they become more predictable for each other. And that's what we've learned. And that's pretty cool. So what was the answer? What was the answer? I think I answered it. Does the concept of unicorns exist in the same way the sun exists? I mean, if we're just gonna, if I have to deal with just that question, because I would not want to deal with just that question. That's why I was trying to add more to it. I would say no. But I don't like that question. Like, I don't want to say that. Like, I wouldn't want to say that. That wouldn't be my final answer if I had to just give that answer. I would want to give more context to what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to communicate something. So I want to give you more. I want to give you more stuff to make more sense of what I'm trying to communicate. No is not. You rephrased the question, answered it. Right. I mean, this is another thing. Like in this, when we start thinking about pragmatism, like we earn so much. There's so much power we gain from thinking about the world in pragmatism, as opposed to there being a right answer. Like when people have questions like that, if they are ambiguous questions, then the person's not going to want to answer an ambiguous answer, because then they aren't actually communicating what they want to communicate with that. They're not actually answering what they would want to answer. So that they're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. Every single answer they give is not going to be what they want to say. So what they have to do when they're given a question that maybe it's like a leading question, right? You could imagine that like a lot of questions are leading questions in some sense. Now, some are more leading than others in certain contexts, but but the question was leading in the types of answers that could possibly be given there, or what the answer or what the question could possibly lead to. All right. Right. What I'm saying is that there is a third option other than no because or yes because. Like that, the questions don't have to have, like, binary questions don't have to have one correct answer and one not correct answer, or one answer and one and not one answer, or I should say only two options. I shouldn't say it that way. It was just, yeah, I guess I won't say it again, but all right, low genuinely nice. They're only damned if the questioner doesn't let them elaborate. In my opinion, it's not about the elaboration. It's about the, like, I don't want to say no or yes, because that's already like implying some weight that I don't want to imply. And it's not I don't know. It's not like, it wouldn't be the same, because I don't know implies that there's something to know in that space. He doesn't do those things. The stuff I'm saying right now, this is I feel like this is like a Wittgenstein type of deal. This is a disciple of the linguistic philosophers. I can't answer that because. That would be better. That would be the best one. I can't answer that because. I should say that next time. If he was a disciple of Russell, it would be different. Oh, I don't know too much about Russell. All right, sorry, I'm getting worked up, but this is the fun stuff. This is the fun part of philosophy, and perhaps I haven't attempted to make my explanation in this regard any stronger in the last year or so, but this might be a fun journey here. Okay, I think your correction in neo-pragmatism makes your point sharper. What you are circling is something like this. The most mature position may not be mental states exist versus mental states do not exist, but rather what are we doing when we use mental state vocabulary? Under what conditions is that vocabulary useful? And when does it mislead us? So this is the same as the question you asked. It's not, I don't want to answer yes or no. It's, I want to point out the question. Like, I want to do something else in the communication here. That is a very neo-pragmatist move. Why neo-pragmatism changes the eliminativism debate. Classic eliminative materialism often gets framed as an ontological dispute. Do beliefs, desires, selves, intentions, or qualia really exist? But from a neo-pragmatist perspective, that can already look suspicious. All right, this is sounding exactly like what I just said. The question, does X exist, is not meaningless, but it is often underspecified. Exist in what sense? As a neural kind? As a useful social attribution? As a legal category? As a predictive abstraction? As a phenomenological report? As a norm-governed role in discourse? So the neo-pragmatist wants to ask, what practical, explanatory, social, ethical, and scientific work does the term perform? That does not mean anything goes. It means the legitimacy of a concept depends on its role in a practice. And I've been using the idea of context to set up, like, the different spaces in which we might be using different words when referring to the physical world versus when we're referring to phenomenology and our subjective conscious experiences. Adam tuned in. Yo, thanks for tuning in. Oh, man, I messed that one up. I probably reused that joke, and I messed it up. 2 strikes. Hopefully I'm not out yet. How's it going? We're just talking about some lovely, lovely philosophy. The usual kind. Okay. So we could say that belief might refer to something scientifically crude as a neural category, or something that's useful in everyday prediction or indispensable in law and moral responsibility, or something that is partially misleading in cognitive science, or maybe it's culturally variable in self-description. But in all those cases, maybe it's still not simply fake. That's exactly why the binary real versus unreal can be too rigid. Yep, I'm always going to be sus about binaries. All right. Eliminativism can be pragmatically, and that makes me a real ally. Eliminativism can be pragmatically useful, but philosophically dangerous. You are right that saying beliefs do not exist can invite bad inferences. It may be intended to mean folk psychological categories are not likely to map cleanly onto mature neuroscience, but many people may hear that subjective experience is fake, or agency is fake, or meaning is fake, or moral responsibility is fake, or are fake. Those are not automatically entailed, but because the word exist carries weight, heavy metaphysical, ethical, and everyday implicatory weight. I actually just made up weight. There is no weight here. I saw heavy and then gave it weight. A pragmatist would say we have to be careful with it. A neo-pragmatist might therefore prefer belief talk is a historically evolved vocabulary for coordinating explanation, prediction, responsibility, and self-understanding. It may not correspond to discrete neural entities, but it remains useful in many human practices. All right, that is different from both naive realism and hard eliminativism. Then we got Rorty-style neo-pragmatism. Vocabularies, not mirrors. The neo-pragmatist move, especially in a Rortyian register, is to stop treating language as a mirror of reality and start treating it as a tool. Yes. So instead of asking, does the word belief correspond to a real inner object, we ask, what does this vocabulary let us do? What does it obscure? What might it imply? What would people infer from this set of words? What alternative vocabulary works better for this purpose? What other words should we use instead? That makes eliminative materialism look like one possible vocabulary reform proposal, not the final metaphysical truth about the mind. The eliminativist says folk psychology is a bad theory, replace it with neuroscience. The neo-pragmatist says maybe, but bad for what, and replaced it where? Neuroscience may be better for some explanatory purposes, while folk psychology remains better for interpersonal, ethical, narratives, pedagogical, or legal purposes. It's still useful to talk about beliefs, even if they are connected to a pattern of neural behavior or activity. Like, there is, in theory, a pattern of neural activity that corresponds to desires, such that when I say that I desire to eat this cake right now, you could expect the type of neural activity that would be in my brain. And yeah, usually that doesn't matter. You would just, take away whatever you would from me saying that. You don't have to actually think about my brain, but yeah, that's a way we can connect those two concepts. Fictionalism fits nicely here. Fictionalism about mental states could say, we talk as if beliefs, desires, intentions, and selves exist because that fiction is useful. But the term fiction can also mislead, right? So maybe fictionalism is also too ambiguous in the sense that it might try to make a case about reality as it is in itself, where we wouldn't want to do that. Neuropragmatism then becomes a further development. This is where your accidental mention of neuropragmatism becomes useful. A neo-pragmatist framework says concepts are tools within practices. A neuropragmatist framework adds those practices are enacted by embodied and cultured, biologically evolved nervous systems. So we should not merely ask what our concepts mean in the abstract. We should ask how human bodies, brains, environments, cultures, and educations shape the intuitions that make those concepts feel natural. So why do we think that the sun is more real than the unicorn? Like, what would actually be happening in our body and brain, and why would that be happening? Looking back to our education and what we've heard and what we've learned, why would that affect this experience for us when we're talking about these concepts right now? How does gaslighting work on a neurological level? Oh, geez. How does gaslighting work? I think it's just a way in which you can leverage someone else's human, biases and heuristics in order to get them to do something that you want them to do. I'd say something like that, or think something that you'd want them to think. So it's a very, I don't know, it's a very sociopathic, like instrumentalist way of dealing with communication, in which you're just trying to get someone to your what you want them to do, as opposed to perhaps looking out for the other person. That's what I would say, something like that. People nowadays think that scientists exist to instruct them, poets, musicians, etc., to give them pleasure. The idea that these have something to teach them, that does not occur to them. Wow, who said that? That's a crazy quote. We should have a wall of quotes. I don't know. I think you are crazy and are making that up. Very nice. Very nice. Wittgenstein. Oh my gosh. There's a reason why Wittgenstein got the glasses. Actually, I didn't let the glasses actually hit his eyes, but yeah, I think Wittgenstein, perhaps among all the people in the video essay, deserve it. All right. We should ask that. That helps us explain why folk psychology is powerful. It is not just a bad theory people happen to believe. It is a socially embedded cognitive technology. Terms like belief, pain, self, choice, attention, and consciousness are not merely labels for internal states. They are part of how humans coordinate, teach, accuse, excuse, confess, deliberate, empathize, gaslight, and regulate one another. There it is, regulation. So yes, neuropragmatism can be seen as a way of grounding neo-pragmatist insights in cognitive science and neuroscience. The position you are describing, I would describe your view as something like revisionary neuropragmatism, expressivism about mental vocabulary. That is a mouthful, but each part matters. Revisionary, because you do not want to preserve folk psychology unchanged. What? Okay, wait. Yes, right. We don't want to think of beliefs as something that is completely decoupled from the brain. So I think that's the revisionary part of this. The neuropragmatism, though that might just be in the neuropragmatist as well. Like, is revisionary not redundant with neuropragmatist? Because you want our concepts to be informed by neuroscience. Okay. Would it make sense to cut revisionary from this new label that you gave, given that neuropragmatist implies revisionary? Then what do we got? Because we want our concepts to be informed by neuroscience, embodiment, culture, all that stuff. Because you are interested in what our language does. Okay. And then I see the neuropragmatism being a sort of meta discussion about our language use, which might be a slightly more mature version of a philosophy than merely following something like Hegel's dialectic or Brandam's social games of giving and asking for reasons. Like, it actually grounds this stuff in the biology of different organisms as they interface each other. So it's actually now grounded in the physical world. The physical / empirical world. What's this last part? Expressivist, pragmatic, because you are interested in what our language does, not merely what it names. Okay. So and then next, I'm curious, where should I go for the most modern version of what I'm trying to say here? Like, which philosophers are actually connecting all these dots and progressing some sort of neo-pragmatism that is grounded in the actual underlying biological systems, or perhaps grounding it in broader psychology and cognitive science, especially regarding social dynamics, etc. All right, we want to get all this stuff. To me, it seems like this type of neo-pragmatism is kind of the end game of philosophy in some sense, but also the starting grounds for now talking about philosophy in the sense where what matters is how we end up communicating things and explaining things. So it completely changes the game, yet it is a nice opening to a new practice. And I'm just curious if anyone's specifically championing, what do I want to say? Not championing. Specifically singing the praises of the, or prophesizing, or prophesizing such a wonderful new day. That's a terrible way to say that, but all right. Oh, this is great. Why existence talk is pragmatically risky. Metaphysical language can be socially irresponsible when it is too blunt. So, for example, saying something like the self does not exist, that could mean no Cartesian soul substance. That could mean there's no single central executive in the brain, or the self is narratively constructed, or person identity is socially mediated, or agency is an illusion, or persons do not matter. Those are radically different claims. Some are plausible, some are dangerous or confused. A pragmatist would say, do not drop a phrase like the self does not exist unless you are willing to specify what practical contrast you are drawing, which is what, when I say precision, I just mean providing more practical contrast. You need to add more so that you're making clear what you're not saying. Okay, there is probably no simple, unified, immaterial self-substance, but there are embodied, socially scaffolded, narratively organized patterns of agency and self-representation that matter for ethics, law, all that, blah, blah, blah. We could say that this is, we could describe the self as an expression of your perception, as Anil Seth does. Is pluralist but not relativist. The position you're gesturing toward is pluralist but not lazy pluralist. Everyone has their own truth. It does not say everyone has their own truth in some sense, but I guess, you know, when I talk about subjective experience, I would have to say that everyone experiences the world with their own version of the truth. Despite the fact that everyone's truth is fundamentally shaped by their culture, and you know, we would end up with pragmatically similar truths in this regard. It says different vocabularies answer to different norms of success. Okay. I wouldn't want to just ground it in norms. I would want to make sure that those norms are grounded in actual neurological systems. All right, bottom line. All right, let's get out of that. Let's keep going. You can't flex your arm like that on camera. I see those veins. Oh my gosh. What did I do? What was my thing? I don't think I'm that large, but I am very veiny. I think I'm actually just lean. Looks maxing his forearms. Then it's not truth. What was that in response to? Oh, if it was just subjective? Right, yeah, the problem is that there's no way of actually encountering some other type of truth that exists elsewhere. Like, truth then has to be some more sophisticated cultural norm about what we're allowed to say is true, which is what I like to always connect these things to. It's like we've actually developed a more sophisticated way in which we can navigate this topic of truth, or this concept of truth, socially. Like, you're not allowed to say something is true unless you provide the evidence for it. And so it's less about like a group of facts that are true, or this like actually transcendent truth, and it's more about what is the heuristic through with which we can then test whether or not what you're saying is true. And that's kind of what I push in this video essay. That's video essay is releasing tomorrow morning at 9:30, I think that's what I set it at. So I don't know how I'm going to market this thing, but I'll try. I'll give it a go. We call that science. Absolutely. Yep. Science, and the norms of logic, because those have developed as well. It's not like there was always the same kind of logic. All right, you can probably cut revisionary from the label if the pragmatism you mean is already robustly anti-foundationalist, anti-mirroring, and practice first. But I would make one distinction. Pragmatist by itself does not always imply revisionary enough. Some pragmatists are quite conservative about ordinary language, democracy, inquiry, science, and common sense practice. But the kind of neo-pragmatism you are describing does imply a standing readiness to revise vocabularies when they stop serving our practices well. Okay, this is one thing I would want to also be careful about. Like, it's less about like us having this like complete view and control over like what a good way to use terms are. Like, we have to be pragmatic in the sense that people just use terms a certain way. So we're actually just trying to find these ways of talking about things that people would understand, as well as would be useful. So it's like there's still the constraint of what people understand. So should I put that in? Should I put that in here before we keep going? Another thing that I would want to stress is that we can't be too instrumentalist with our discussion of this type of neo-pragmatism. We aren't constantly choosing how we should use words because they're going to lead us to some end, or because we know that they are beneficial ways to use words. We have to acknowledge that we are constrained in fundamental ways based on our culture when we use words. First of all, we can think about this in terms of just like the social dynamics of, we have to leverage words that we think other people will understand, and then we get to be creative within that space. And then the other way to think about this is through a grounded way of what's actually happening in our brain, such that we are constrained by our past and our culture, such that what ends up becoming conscious to us is, in some fundamental sense, not under our control in the way that we might intuit. All right, let's just add all that to all this to that. All right, now let's run it. All right, and then we got to call this. We got to call the stream, unfortunately. All right. If you call the position something like neuro-naturalized neo-pragmatism or embodied neo-pragmatism, that revisionary element is already implied. Pragmatism, especially in Dewey, Rorty, Brandom, and the 4E inactivist traditions, is already anti-foundationalist and anti-static. It treats vocabularies, concepts, and practices as historically situated tools, not eternal mirrors of reality. But it is still useful when you want to contrast your view with a merely descriptive pragmatism. All right. I don't really care about this label here. I just want to get to who else is talking in this space. What words are they using? Your instinct about Brandom is right, but with qualification. Brandom is extremely helpful for understanding language as a normative social practice. We make claims, undertake commitments, attribute entitlements, challenge reasons, and revise our positions. A recent Notre Dame Philosophical Review's discussion summarizes Brandam's views as one where sentences get their meanings by being embedded in the social practice of giving and asking for reasons, right? But you are noticing a limitation. Brandam's account can feel too high level, too rational discursive, too focused on explicit norm-governed practices. It explains the space of reasons, but not always the organism that gets into that space. That's not a great way to say this, but once again, like we are just physical organisms operating in social interactions, which is just interactions with other matter that happens to be quite complex, and that affects the models in our own brains, or it affects the activity and the matter in our own brains that affects our experience. All right. Language games are not floating normative structures. They are enacted by organisms with bodies, nervous systems, developmental histories, affective dispositions, cultural training, and limited conscious control. That is exactly where Dewey and neopragmatism, embodied cognition, enactivism, and predictive processing become relevant. All right, we got our predictive processing here. Dewey is especially important here because he already framed pragmatism in organism environment terms. SEP describes Dewey's cultural naturalism as a reconstruction of philosophy inside a Darwinian worldview where organism, environment, and culture are mutually implicated rather than separable layers. We might have to dive into Dewey. John Dewey. Oh my gosh, to do this at that long ago is insane. Should Dewey be the new champion here? Stan is a flosser. He just doesn't know it yet. Very nice. Yeah, I think it'll be nice to have such a great philosophical grounding when we actually go into the stuff that I want to get into for the sake of this channel. Like we're actually trying to, help people out. So we have to get into all the self-help topics, but we can always ground those self-help topics back into this fundamental philosophy and science, which gives us such an edge, I think. All right, so Brandam gives us a theory of explicit discursive normativity. Dewey and activism, neuropragmatism, and cognitive science helps explain how biological and social organisms become the kind of creatures who can participate in those normative practices at all. All right, so we want to resist crude instrumentalism. A shallow pragmatism says words are tools we choose to achieve goals, but that is too voluntaristic. I've never seen that word. We are not sovereign language users standing outside culture, selecting vocabularies from a menu. A deeper pragmatism says words are tools, but we inherit them, are formed by them, and often only become conscious of their function after they have already shaped our perception, salience, emotion, and action. Beautiful. That is why habit is central. Dewey's pragmatism is not just about deliberate problem solving. It is about how conduct is shaped by habits, impulses, institutions, and environments. Man, Dewey is crazy. The Deweyan line fits your point that language is not merely selected instrumentally. It is embodied and cultured and only partly available to reflective control. Dewey is described by IEP as rejecting dualistic epistemology in favor of knowledge as active adaptation of the human organism to its environment. All right. So the view stated more sharply would be something like language use is pragmatic but not freely instrumental. We are constrained by biological embodiment, developmental history, affect, culture, social intelligibility, and the affordances of inherited vocabularies. Where the most modern versions of your view lives. There's no single prophet of exactly your whole synthesis, so we must be the prophet. The live work is distributed across several overlapping camps. We got neuropragmatism, the most direct label. So we've got, all right, we gotta actually look into these. Maybe tomorrow I just come back to this conversation and we just start looking into each of these. Oh, I thought this said Spengler, but it said Springer. My apologies. Their neuropragmatism and philosophical manifesto defines neuropragmatism as a scientifically informed treatment of cognition, knowledge, body-mind relations, agencies, socialization, and related issues. Their broader project explicitly tries to develop a neuroscience-informed pragmatism and a pragmatically informed neuroscience. Wow. A Springer volume on neuroscience, neurophilosophy, and pragmatism describes this as covering mental life, education, and ethics. Awesome. We got to check this out. This might be the stuff. It's not as culturally famous as Rorty or Brandom, but it is closer to your synthesis. All right, so Mark Johnson, Embodied Meaning, Values, and Pragmatism. Probably essential for me. He connects pragmatism, embodiment, meaning, affect, metaphor, aesthetics, and cognitive science. His own page describes the body in the mind and philosophy in the flesh as works exploring the bodily basis of meaning, imagination, reason, and emerging neuroscience evidence for embodied cognition. His later Embodied Mind, Meaning, and Reason is described as arguing that a satisfactory account of mind must explain how bodily perception and action give rise to cognition, meaning, language, action, and values. Okay. Johnson is very close to your idea that philosophy has to stop pretending concepts are disembodied abstractions. All right, enactivism and 4E cognition, right? We've been in the 4E space when we were reading the embodied cognition. We know these names now. We know a lot of these names now. I don't know these names actually. We know this name. We haven't seen these names maybe. No, we've seen Hutto. Daniel Hutto. I probably mispronounced it every single time. Okay. So, all right, we're good with that. Radical enactivism, anti-representational but not crude eliminativist. I see. Okay, so this is where I get a little like we could talk about these things in these different ways. Yeah, when we're talking about representational and when we're talking about models and expectations about the world, it is representational inherently. It implies that we end up with like representations of things, as if the concepts that we can theorize as being the contents of our experience are like in the brain somehow, or like actually the reflections of what's going on. And I think that's like philosophically beneficial. So it's like a beneficial way in which we can conceptualize what's going on. I don't think we have to be so firm about denying that type of explanation, even though it's not necessarily right in some fundamental way. You could just also go with some sort of radical enactivism. However, yeah. All right. Okay, but you know what? This is actually this is an easier claim to be down with. Resist the idea that basic cognition always involves contentful internal representations, right? Like you don't have to experience all these things for you to use it, right? Like we always talk about the pen. Like I don't have to think about the pen when I'm starting to use it. So that wouldn't require representation of the pen. All right, predictive processing, active inference. We've been new. This gives you a scientifically grounded way to say our conscious experience is not a transparent window onto the world. All right, that's the thesis of the essay, basically. It is an achievement of embodied prediction. Okay, so the next thing we have to do tomorrow is give the video essay script and tell it, okay, this is where we've been. Where do we go from here? And then we probably have to finally tell it what we're actually trying to do, which is how do we then leverage this for something beneficial, which we could then grab the implications that we've already mapped out in the other document we have from the perception stuff. All right, so this could help us out. This is fun stuff for me. Social cognition and participatory sense making. Arguing that social cognition is not merely one brain inferring another brain's hidden states. Ooh, interaction itself can partly constitute social understanding. Right. I mean, this becomes a an ongoing system where there's constant active inference, not just inference, perceptual inference. There's active inference. One minimalist virtual reality study by that found that co-regulated embodied interaction was correlated with identifying another's avatar and awareness of the other's presence. Okay. This is what Anil Seth, I think, even used, maybe, if I'm thinking of the same thing. Okay. Is this the end game of philosophy? I would be careful with the end game, but I understand the impulse. It's not the end of philosophy as inquiry. It is the end of a certain fantasy of philosophy. Philosophy is the discovery of context-free, ahistorical, disembodied essences. What replaces it is philosophy as conceptual ecology, vocabulary criticism, practical analysis, and reconstructive orientation within human life. As a very Deweyan idea, becomes less like metaphysical cartography and more like reflective cultural self-correction. But it does not make ontology, truth, logic, ethics, or metaphysics disappear. It reframes them. The question becomes, what are these vocabularies doing, under what constraints, and what forms of life do they make possible or impossible? Okay, so Dewey first, not Rorty first. Mark Johnson. And then Solomozzi and Shook for neopragmatism. Brand him as a foil and resource. All right, we already got that. We already got this. And we already got this. So maybe we do these. I'm not sure. Best short label for your view. I would avoid making the label too baroque. We don't need a label. All right. Oh, no. I think I was about to head off to a few minutes of a conversation between two streamers about philosophy. Can we do this tomorrow or some other time this week? I wouldn't mind doing so. I was hoping to close out right now. I feel like I'm at the edge of my power juice. Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate the topic though, the recommendation. Do they stream on Twitch? What's the link? Is this referring to the... Okay, nice. All right, I think I'm going to call it there. Thanks, everyone, for indulging that and helping along with that. It's been a while since we've gone back down and talked straight philosophy, I think. So that was fun. Thank you to you all. And yeah, have a good rest of the